Yeah.
Have good social work, and then like a prostitute wouldn't.
Okay, yeah, we did. We used the idea of a prostitute. When you think about it, the argument would be is that if somebody can come back and contribute, you needed to be able to justify. You needed to be able to justify your surgery, this procedure, you being picked by what you could give back. And the sense of it was is that if you were like a 25 or 30-year-old school teacher, that you, in fact, could provide more positive impact, if you would, on society than maybe a number of other professions. And one of the ones that came up was prostitute. Now, I'm not saying necessarily anything bad about prostitutes, I don't misunderstand, but in terms of social worth, it makes sense that a teacher would probably be considered a little better. You mentioned lawyer before. Lawyer is more of a mixed bag because lawyers can contribute, but not everybody always agrees that lawyers contribute positively to society. So they could be protected in this or not. The trick on this, if you got the treatment, you lived, and they called it the God Committee because if you didn't get the treatment, you died. That's basically what it was on this. And the moral of the article is, when you think about it, when federal government gets involved and there's resources, they expand healthcare, which is a nice omen. But the other omen that's out there is, do we have enough resources in today's America? We're $17 trillion in the hole. Maybe this is ominous in addition to trying to give us a little bit of a silver lining. What was the example? There was a first belief quiz that I had given y'all, right?
Right.
What was the first belief quiz that I had given you? Anybody remember?
That was...
Because this article was an example of one of those particular categories.
It was the redistribution and regulation.
Redistribution and regulation. If you go back and you look, and this is a different book. I left the accurate book at home, but it's the same general concept, and you'll see it in there as this warms up. Under states and the economy, it says, talking about classifying governments, it says, yet another way to classify governments is how they handle the economy. States face two questions. How much of the economy should the state own or supervise, and how much of the nation's wealth should be redistributed to help the poor sections or sectors of society? I had given you the first belief quiz, and it was dealing with regulation, and it was dealing with redistribution. And this was the redistribution line, and this was the regulation line. Now, going back to those terms, as you look at this, there was laissez-faire, there was statist, socialist,
welfare state.
and welfare state. Okay, are y'all familiar with what those four are? Go ahead, Natalie. What was any of those four that you want to mention regarding redistribution and regulation?
Welfare and, I mean, I remember welfare because I was placed in that category.
Okay, do you remember what welfare believed?
It was there's something about like providing for, no, maybe I'm confusing it.
The welfare state was down in the bottom right-hand corner. And the welfare state believed that government should redistribute, but government should not regulate that much.
You said they were cradle to grave.
Cradle to grave protection. So when you think about it, they're going to provide services that people here in the United States aren't necessarily going to get. Maybe it's health insurance, maybe it's education, maybe it's child care. What's the problem with the welfare state?
High taxes.
High taxes. You provide all these services, it's going to result in higher taxes, maybe 50% or more, as the chapter mentions in there, and that could be a problem. Remember, one of the questions that I've consistently asked you is, who can spend the money better? Do I think that I can spend my money better than the government can spend it for me, or do I think that the government can spend my money better generally for me or for the population than the population can spend for itself? Natalie, if you're a welfare stater, you believe that government should redistribute. You believe that government should take from the rich and give to the poor. That government should provide certain services that people maybe won't think to look for or won't be able to look for on their own because government can do it better. When it comes to regulating the economy, though, the welfare state is saying, let's stay out of regulation. Let's stay out of regulation. Now, if you notice, over here in this bottom left was minus minus. You folks were my libertarians. And if you remember, I'm sorry, laissez-faire. Get my charts mixed up. You folks were my laissez-faire. And literally means to allow one to do. It does overlap with libertarian in the sense that, again, the government is really the problem. But under laissez-faire, it literally means in French to allow one to do. To allow one to do. So the thought process is that in terms of economics, I should not have to worry about redistribution. I spend my money better than the government can spend it for me. I should be able to earn mine. You should be able to earn yours. And then we should both be able to go forward. In terms of regulation, limited government regulation. And do you remember the article that I had given you as an example of laissez-faire?
The bucket?
Paid vacation.
The paid vacations. How much paid vacation does the United States guarantee its workers?
No.
It does not guarantee any at all. And it went through a series of the European countries. It went through some other countries like China and Japan. All of them offered more paid vacation for its citizens than the United States offers for our own. And when you think about it, that's a really good example of no regulation. You should be allowed, you should be responsible for negotiating your own vacation, and then in fact you should go forward from there. The government should not force people to take these things. Do you remember what the average productivity was for an American worker? Now I want to make sure I get to this because we may not have actually dealt with this. I'll go back into the article, and this is just the paid vacation article. And it says in here, and it's got this nice chart dealing with these hours. It also goes on here, and it talks about productivity as well. And when it talks about productivity, it says up here, Norway is number 1 at 62.66, France at 54.08, Ireland at 48.86. In the United States, the average is $47.42. So we, on average, regardless of what our job is, produce $47.42 per hour at the job that we work. They're only paying us 8 or 10 or 12. That should tell you something. And if you remember when we were talking about socialism the other day, I had asked you, you're basically selling your life when you go to work. Is your time really worth that when you actually contribute that to the people that are paying you? That's a debate that comes up sometimes. So keep this article in mind. And we spent a reasonable amount of time on this, but we didn't go crazy. Do you remember the other two categories? What were they again, Lee?
Statist and socialist.
Socialists. Socialists are going to believe that we do regulate. Both regulation, where government should have an active role in both regulating the economy and in redistributing. And do you remember the article in the video clip that I gave you for this? The dude. The dude. Rick Santelli. Take a good look at the Rick Santelli video and that article talking about mortgages. Are we our brother's keepers? Because if you remember what Santelli had said, Santelli said we need to reward the people that actually carry the water rather than the people that drink it. And that actually becomes kind of a populist argument in that video. But the other thing is, the question is, if I am able to pay my mortgage and somebody else makes a bad decision, should I be responsible for not only paying my mortgage, but then having my tax dollars go and help them paying theirs? That doesn't seem fair. So you can go, and it's, of course, a number of people said, no, it's just the big businesses. It's the man keeping people down. They're making bad choices because they were goaded into it by the banks. Of course, some of you, the others said, well, no, wait a minute. They didn't put a gun to your head. If you sign the papers, it's on you. Go ahead, Natalia.
What's the name of that article?
That was Are We Our Brother's Mortgages? Are We Our Brother's
Okay.
Keepers? And there's a link in there, too, dealing with this one.
Wait, so the Santelli video on the website?
Yeah, the Santelli video. If you go to links, you'll notice in there there's the child labor and the Santelli video. So yeah, they're both there. The last one up here, and I know I'm just about out of time, is this idea of the statists. And if you remember, the statists were the ones that ultimately believed. The statists were the ones that believed, in fact, that if you're not contributing to society, then in fact you're bringing it down. And they believed that you should be free to earn as much as you wanted without it being redistributed, but they would regulate you within an inch of your life. And if you remember with this was the Nazi group that was a lot like Hitler. In the 11 o'clock class, Saya was most likely to be the statist, and in the morning class it was actually Catherine. And I've yelled Nazi at Catherine when I've seen her on campus, and she's waved back. So I assume that it's accepted at this point. But I give this to you, and these are the pieces on this. For both of these charts, understand what government should regulate and understand what it calls that government shouldn't, and be able to link articles for examples with this. That would probably be a safe thing to do. Now, regarding the political culture, and I don't have these terms up, but I'm going to add these as soon as we get done. Basically, with political culture, we dealt with the political parties, and we had kind of gotten down into the culture wars idea on this. So if you think about yesterday, the definition of political culture would be a good one. The definition of public opinion and how it's different would be good ones. If you remember, we discussed the sleeping dogs quote and within the context of American voters. America as a democracy, is it an effective democracy? Is it the world's best or not? You can give me one argument for each one, right? Go ahead. What's the argument? Anybody? Go ahead, Annie.
One with this sleeping dog's lives, like if you have too many elections, then the voter turnout begins to dwindle. So that's why we're really productive, and democratic, but because there's so many elections.
That's right. We have the most elections in the world. So what's the argument that we're not a good democracy? Where does the U.S. rank?
138 out of
138 out of 169, or basically in the bottom 20% of the world in terms of voter turnout. It's very low. And if you remember, it was lower than Mongolia, Iceland, Canada, Mexico, and Italy. So keep this in mind. And this was just from the other day, and I'll make sure that this is posted. I had given you a really good quote from the culture wars, and I want to make sure that I give this one back to you again, because this one is about as good of a quote as I think I can give you regarding differences between Democrats and Republicans. And I read this in both classes, and it says down here, talking about culture wars, it says, excuse me, now America seems to be two countries. One is conservative, evangelical, small town, and living in the middle of the country, votes Republican. The other is liberal, secular, urban, living on both coasts. It votes Democrat. And it went on talking about Clinton, Obama, talking about Michael Moore and George W., the Iraq War, and these other things. Pay good attention to that, because that quote there really set the stage, if you remember, for the shopping articles that we dealt with. So Walmart was raised. Target was raised. Penny's and Sears were raised. Bloomingdale's and Neiman Marcus were raised. Cracker Barrel was raised along with Whole Foods. And then the other one, if you remember on there, was Chick-fil-A. So maybe shopping is going to be something that's got to be on this in some capacity. And these were the articles from the other day. Anybody with any questions about anything? Yes, Lee.
In chapter 7, I didn't fully understand their definition of civic society and also how it impacted the political culture.
Don't worry about that for the exam. Don't worry about that for the exam.
So
yes.
what's not going to be on the exam from chapter 7?
I will go ahead and post those terms today, and I'll go ahead and chop this down. Basically, we are stopping at culture wars. So everything above is going to be on there, and I'll add the terms in just a few minutes, and I'll go ahead and add those articles, which was the shopping articles, and the other one was the 138. Now, the 11 o'clock class, y'all got into castle doctrine and guns.
I'm not in that one.
Yeah, but 9:30 did not.
Oh.
So the 11 o'clock folks, I'm going to give you guys, make sure that you've got castle doctrine in there, talking about the ability to be able to shoot to defend your home. I'll make sure that y'all have that, because it was the last thing we did. And 9:30, what's that?
You'll post all of those.
I'm going to post all that just in the next few minutes, yeah. Yes, sir, Mom.
We just know the terms and articles that we get, or should we?
There's terms, articles, and then there are those chapter questions.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
Don't forget about those chapter questions. And like I said at the beginning, I usually am about a full chapter ahead of where we are right now, and the weather has played a role in this, because this is actually kind of a quick chapter. Make sure that you're good with all of the chapter questions. And I believe I sent y'all out an email that removed 3 of them.
Yes.
3 of them. Otherwise, all of them are fair game, and there's probably going to be a few more chapter questions than normal on this one because we're a little bit behind. That is, yes, Annie.
Can you go over the take-home part of this?
The take-home part, don't worry about that. It's not due until the Thursday after. But basically, for the take-home, all you have to do is compare the articles with